Hi, welcome to Oxford Analytica's video briefing. I'm Chris Oates, analyst for North America. I'm joined by Benjamin Charlton, senior analyst for East Asia, and we're here to talk about the protests in Hong Kong that have been gripping that city for the past few days. Now, Benjamin, just to start, what are these protests about?
Well, Hong Kong is run under a model, a concept, if you like, called one country, two systems, which is in effect a very sort of loose federal arrangement with the central government in China and the city government of Hong Kong. So Hong Kong runs its own internal affairs, it has its own legislature, it has its own legal system, it has its own currency, and the central government is really in principle responsible for national security, defence and foreign policy. The protests are really fundamentally about how far that autonomy goes, how much is Hong Kong allowed to be different from the rest of China, how far are the people and institutions of Hong Kong allowed to determine their own future. Now, under the agreement between Hong Kong and Hong Kong, China and the UK, when the city was handed to China in 1997, 2017 was set as a date when the people of Hong Kong would be allowed to elect their own leader. 2017 is approaching. In late August, the central government in China released its plans for the system under which that election would take place. Many people in Hong Kong have been upset about that. They don't think it's democratic enough, and that's what sparked these protests.
Now, has anything like this ever happened before?
Well, protests are pretty common in Hong Kong. It's really quite an open, liberal society. Almost every year on kind of key symbolic dates, we see large street demonstrations for various grievances or others. As recently as the 1st of July, there was a protest march of between 100 and 200,000 people through central Hong Kong. In the early 2000s, maybe as much as 500,000 people took to the streets, and that eventually led to the chief executive, the leader of Hong Kong at the time, stepping down. So it's not unprecedented in that sense, but what's different about this one is, firstly, it's indefinite. So these activists who mobilized these protests intend to occupy the city centre until they get what they want. This is not one-day protest march. This is designed to inflict disruption on the city and be impossible to ignore.
And what seems to be the most likely result from this over the next few weeks? What are the course of events that are most probable to happen?
Well, the city authorities have been really left to deal with this by themselves. Beijing's taken quite a hands-off approach. This was quite wise, actually, because sort of blundering in there would have confirmed exactly the sort of fears that these protesters and the sort of associated movements have about Beijing sort of meddling in Hong Kong affairs as they see it. So the city authorities have been sort of on a fairly sharp learning curve dealing with these protests. The police were well prepared, but when the protests first broke out, they went in very heavy-handed with tear gas and pepper spray and so on. And that really prompted a massive public backlash. That was very unpopular. Tens of thousands of people joined the protests who probably wouldn't have done otherwise, just out of sympathy. They've since sort of taken a slightly lighter approach, so the police presence has been scaled back. They've been much more sort of conciliatory, and we've seen over the past 10 days or so, the protests have really sort of started to dwindle. Where there were, at the peak, maybe 100,000 people in the streets, there are now only a few hundred in maybe 3 locations in the city.
And do you think that this will have any repercussions for the rest of China? Even though Hong Kong has its own system at the moment, protests are not uncommon in mainland China. Do you think that this will serve as a model for grievances within the rest of the People's Republic?
Indeed. protests are not uncommon in China. What marks most protests in China, as well as this one in Hong Kong, is that there's really quite a specific local grievance behind it. There's a very concrete aim. It's not an expression of generalized discontent with the political system. We're not looking at another 1989. The sort of one would expect fears of a kind of spread from Hong Kong, a sort of spillover into the mainland. I think there are a number of reasons why that hasn't happened and was never likely to happen, really. One thing is that the Chinese censorship apparatus is very strong and very effective, largely. There are ways around it, but by and large, it works. So Beijing's been able to keep news of the protests and the kind of contentions in Hong Kong insulated from most of China. The other reason is that there is less sympathy than one might expect among people in the mainland for people in Hong Kong. The issue they're protesting about, which is more democracy, already they have far more than most people in China have. People in China regard Hong Kong as sort of spoilt in a way. They don't know how good they have it. They already have it much better than people in the mainland. So you wouldn't expect necessarily some kind of solidarity movement in the rest of China. And you wouldn't expect people in China to kind of take up the same cause for themselves, because the system in Hong Kong is just so different.
So politics aside, Hong Kong is one of the world's largest financial centers. It has a huge economy. Is this going to have any economic impacts, not only for the past few days, but perhaps in the coming quarter or in the years to come?
Well, the immediate economic impact has simply been that some businesses have missed a few days. The timing of the protests matters here. They were timed to coincide with the National Day public holiday. This means they've hurt some businesses less than they otherwise would, businesses that would have been closed anyway. They've hurt other businesses more than they otherwise would. The sort of consumption associated with the public holiday in entertainment, leisure, tourism, and so on. And it's this sector of the economy and society where you've actually seen some kind of backlash against the protests from the public. So these are sort of small business owners who have less of a cushion against this sort of disruption. Turning to the longer term, I think there might be actually a positive impact in a way. These protests were long feared. A lot of the big international companies operating in Hong Kong had made extensive contingency plans, expecting the worst. The worst really hasn't happened. There hasn't been chaos. The way things have turned out, it's really demonstrated that Hong Kong's people and government and police are able to contain and accommodate some really very deep political tensions without the situation degenerating into violence or spiraling into wholesale political instability. So I think that's actually merits some confidence in Hong Kong. Another thing which does is the determination we've seen of Hong Kong civil society to stand up for what makes Hong Kong special, what makes Hong Kong different from the rest of China, what makes Hong Kong actually a very attractive place for foreign investors, which is precisely that the reach of the central government and the Communist Party and the established political system in China is limited. Hong Kong has, by many standards, very clean government. Of course, there is corruption. It's less of a problem than in most places in the world. In fact, never mind China. Has an independent judiciary. It has a free media. It has a transparent system, and it's really this advantage of Hong Kong, as well as democratic principles that these protesters are mobilizing to defend.
Well, it's nice to be able to finish one of these briefings on a positive note. And for more on this story or any other story in the global political economy, please keep reading the Daily Brief or be in touch with Benjamin, myself, or any of the analysts at Oxford Analytica. Thank you.